Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. My name is Aaron Krickenberger. Today is Tuesday, April 3rd, and you are attending the weekly Kubernetes SIG testing meeting, which is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube publicly shortly thereafter. On today's agenda, we're going to talk real briefly about plans for KubeCon, if folks have them. We got a couple talks there. Matt Fisher, if you're here, or other folks, there was discussion about sort of a developer tools working group, and we wanted to discuss if there's any overlap with sort of the scope and mission of this SIG. Then we wanted to have a discussion around, what are some same defaults around the behavior of the LGTM approve and GitHub, like actually pressing the approve button when you're doing a GitHub review thing. So with that, Sen, did you want to sort of talk briefly about KubeCon topics?
Sure. So I had a chat with Aaron last week. So I think we got 2 talks for the upcoming KubeCon. Aaron got the introduction to Prow, something like that one, and me and Co will talking the SIG testing deep dive. From the current plan, looks like Aaron is going to more focus on how good is Prow, like just bragging about how do I say? Let me.
I kind of wanted to just sort of tell the story of how we got to where we are today, and kind of end the story on where we are today is Prow, and you too can use Prow on your own projects. But I kind of wanted to highlight some of the challenges we faced along the way because of our unique scale or because of the unique things that we were tackling. So I figure there was a document I saw Ben and Jeff and some of the folks contribute to that sort of documented the history behind moving from a bunch of Jenkins jobs to a bunch of Jenkins job builder stuff to Bootstrap to, where we want to head. And yes, I'm going to see if I can't bring my This Is Fine plushy dog on stage as the mascot. So I wanted to give just sort of an intro of and tell some interesting stories, and then hand off to Sen for the deep dive later, and then we talk about specific stuff.
Mm-hmm. My current plan is that I can talk about in depth of a life cycle of a Prow job, how Prow works, what each component of Prow works, and what happens if you open the PR or you /retest. And then Co can talk about Tide in general. I believe we are going to flip Tide for the main KK repo, hopefully before KubeCon. So we should let people know more about Tide and how it works versus the current queue.
How much time do you have before this talk?
A month-ish.
So technically my slides are due April 16th, but the deep dive, you don't have to have, there's no due date for slides or anything, so you can keep working up until day of.
Because I was going to say, if you wanted to be, if we get the tracer UI looking prettier, it might be a really nice place to tell the full story of oh, here's every webhook we ever saw, here's what we did with it, you can see jobs transition.
Do you think we will have enough time to maybe talk a little bit about future plans or our roadmap? We just started to think about that a little bit. I want to share a document with SIG testing soon, in a week or two, for opinions and thoughts. But I don't know if that might be too soon for KubeCon or.
It could maybe be a thing to say come by the SIG testing deep dive if you want to learn more about where we're headed.
Cool. Showing the dashboards would be really nice too. I know there's a lot of material design work there. I don't know if everybody in the community has seen them.
How is the future goals doc being written?
Which one?
You said you were going to share a document for future goals.
Yep.
So how is that being put together?
Oh, I just started to write that, like with some brainstorms with Eric and some of the other folks. It's just very bare bones at the moment, but I wanted to get some more ideas about what we want to do.
Okay, maybe we should share that across for the SIG mailing list.
Yes, definitely. I just think it's not yet mature enough to do that. I wanted to write that a little bit more.
Okay.
But definitely.
Yeah, and I think me and Aaron can host a dry run session before KubeCon, so for across SIG testing, so we can get some feedbacks and comments.
Totally. Okay, I want to keep us moving along, so look for more from Sen and I. I'm falling behind. I meant to have some slides done today, but soon. Somebody named Matt, Jews. How about you, Matt Rickard? I heard there was a discussion at SIG Apps on Monday around the concept of a developer tools working group. And I know that folks in this SIG have also expressed some ideas that maybe some of what that working group was proposing might overlap with where we were, or what our interests are. So I was wondering if you could sort of summarize where the discussion is at thus far and what we can help contribute to that discussion.
Sure. Hey guys, we got Matt and Dan here. We work at Google on developer tooling, MiniCube, scaffolds, container diff, a bunch of random container tools. Our team originally made the proposal. There was a lot of interest, obviously some pushback from SIG Apps who felt like there was a bit of overlap. We proposed a working group because we knew that there would be a lot of overlap with a lot of SIGs, and this would kind of span a bunch of projects. Basically where we're at right now is trying to figure out, basically where we could do this. Is it part of SIG Apps? Does it live on its own? Basically kind of formalizing what a working group is and trying to get something going at the same time. So there was no clear consensus from the SIG Apps meeting, but we're kind of taking the time this week to meet with a few different SIGs, including you guys, just to see, where, how we could not duplicate effort and how we could actually, produce some good stuff out of it. That's kind of where we stand right now. We're planning to, focus on a lot of developer tooling. So, we're the maintainers of MiniCube. So I know that it sounds like you guys have been working on something different, but similar for local clusters. I guess we would love to hear about some of the effort going on there. People have used MiniCube in things like Travis CI and very basic CI systems to kind of smoke test their apps. I think we would love to have a better story there for something like MiniCube. And if that's not a virtualized solution, if it's, an on-cluster solution or something like that, that would also be great. That's just where we stand from that specific view.
The only overlap I can think of that we've actually talked about on testing common stuff with regards to MiniCube is that the DIND build artifacts for the main output of Kubernetes components need to be the latest versions, and ideally not virtualized. We kind of consider, there's a mild joke that the MiniCube is kind of like a turducken, right? There's layers to it. And ideally we'd want to have a DIND environment or Docker and Docker for blasting out some test jiggery, but that doesn't preclude us from also having hiding the details behind an interface library, where people that want to use MiniCube could use it if they're setting up test apparatus for a well-versioned environment, and they could probably just do that today anyways, and people do that. But we're setting it up for an automation, a set of automation systems to do it with the latest artifacts, because we want to be able to have it be the upstream development tooling, not a sort of downstream consumable.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a lot of MiniCube that we don't really since we're part of SIG cluster lifecycle, but we have some meetings with Red Hat and other folks, but I don't think we get the word out enough. But we actually have two kind of main interfaces in MiniCube to allow this sort of, hiding behind MiniCube. So one being the bootstrapper interface, which we use to kind of transition from LocalCube, which was our single binary way of, we basically vendored in all of Kubernetes and ran all the components as Go routines, which was quite a hack that lasted quite a long time. But it was good because it was fast and it was a good development tool, but it wasn't great for kind of looking like a production cluster. So we transitioned to kubeadmin. So that's what we're using now to set up the cluster. But this bootstrapping interface is pretty simple. It's just kind of ways to start the cluster, stop the cluster, do some specific operations on the cluster. But I could imagine there being other implementations of setting up the cluster, and it could possibly be what you guys are working on. It could be a lot of different things. The other interface being kind of our libmachine interface that we've taken from Docker Machine, if you guys remember that. But basically that's responsible for not provisioning the cluster, but provisioning the kind of environment. So in this case, it handles kind of cross-platform virtualization, so using the native hypervisors on each platform. But we also have a none driver, if you guys are familiar with it, which basically skips this step. So people are using that in places where they can't add that extra layer of virtualization, like Travis or on the cloud if you're not using something that supports nested virtualization. So I think the combination of those two things would allow a lot of users to continue to use the MiniCube CLI, and then also have this kind of custom way or maybe even better way of running conformance tests or running integration tests on upstream stuff.
Can I build a MiniCube environment against the latest build artifacts ahead?
So right now we support that with the kubelet. Not so much. We don't have a great story with the containerized artifacts. But I mean, that's something that, it's definitely doable. It just requires a bit of work, except for the kubelet, which you can do today.
That's our primary driver, at least today.
We're interested in local, like, multi-node, and also definitely running on cluster is one of our requirements, which is why Quentin's been looking at the D&D stuff. But just more generally, 7 minutes, but I've been here on engineering productivity at Google, working on the test infra stuff a lot. I see some overlap with this work group just in interest by developers for building things on Kubernetes and deploying to Kubernetes, because it turns out with all the infrastructure that testing does, we wind up doing a lot of that as well. So any sort of tooling that enhances that, at the very least, we like to be looped in so we can try to dogfood some of it ourselves. But we also might have some thoughts there around some of the things we've tried.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that, so we had a few people approach us with a multi-node proposal for MiniCube. And so we've been meeting a lot kind of out of band around those efforts. But part of the reason for starting this working group is that, something like that is not a fundamental shift in MiniCube, but it's going to require a lot of work to kind of support, our current users. But it's something that we definitely want to do. It's just a matter of making sure that we match all the features with people who are going to be able to work on them and maintain them. And that's kind of the motivation behind getting a working group, just so that we can connect all of the people that are interested in these efforts. Because, I mean, there are a lot of people interested in these things. We just don't have a way of, kind of coordinating that effort.
So speaking with my steering committee hat on, working groups aren't supposed to be entities that own code. SIGs are supposed to be entities that own code. Sub-projects are supposed to be things that are well contained within SIGs that can sort of determine their own destiny, so to speak. So I think, like, for example, the reason MiniCube may have ended up within clustered lifecycle is I think clustered lifecycle is the SIG that's responsible for how you sort of deploy and stand up and manage the lifecycle of various kinds of clusters, be that a single node cluster that's running on your laptop that's easy for development purposes, or a COPS cluster that runs in AWS, or what have you. So my reaction is one of meeting overload, kind of. So I hear definitely that there's some overlapping interests with MiniCube and ways of like whether or not we want to try and have one canonical way of developing and testing against a low resource consumption local Kubernetes, both for developers and for our CI infrastructure. But I'm trying to understand if there are other areas of overlap that make this worth spanning multiple SIGs and being another meeting worth attending. This is just like my personal view. I've always thought that like a lot of what it sounds like you're discussing when you talk about Scaffold and the other projects is stuff that's more about, given a Kubernetes cluster, what can we make it easier to do to develop on top of that cluster, which I think that we would want to be downstream consumers of for sure, because we run a bunch of applications on a Kubernetes cluster. But I think that a lot of the tooling that we produce is about making it easier to contribute to the Kubernetes project as a whole and develop Kubernetes itself, not so much applications on top of Kubernetes. Does that line up with other people's expectations?
Well, the testing common stuff is both. It crosses over into that space because the primary use case is to develop common infrastructure for both upstream Kubernetes as well as external providers who want to have apparatus that they can jig into that's common as the repo gets forked in many directions, right? So it needs to be tooling that spans repositories. And that's part of the goal. And it kind of overlaps. It's definitely not, it's a Venn diagram. It's not total overlapping, but there is overlap there. We've talked internally about possibly using MiniCube, but there is limitations against it, which were just addressed, which is the multi-node and latest binary bits. Those are the two constraints that we're dealing with.
I mean, I guess ultimately, like, if it's a sub-project or if it's a working group, it's going to be another meeting either way. It's just in terms of the number of separate discrete entities we have. The working group's not owning code thing, I think, is maybe the biggest thing that I see. So as an example, there's like the application definition working group, which was formed because it seemed like there are a bunch of disparate interests across SIGs. And I think the way that's worked now is like each different SIGs are owning different parts of the concerns that were raised. But I think the working group still might exist as a way to like make sure everybody is actually following through and delivering on the things they said they would deliver on. I don't know.
Yeah, the way Brian Grant kind of worded things in the discussion on the working group thread was that it's okay for working groups to kind of form small task forces that go and contribute improvements to a wide range of tools, but those improvements have to ultimately be owned by the sub-project or the SIG or whatever owns those tools. So kind of like short-term resource needs across a whole bunch of different SIGs or sub-projects can kind of be tackled by a working group. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's not going to be a repository somewhere that's long-lived with code owned by a working group.
Yeah, we're not planning on, I mean, the SIG ownership of things like MiniCube or, tools like Scaffold and Draft are not like CNCF projects, but, we want to make sure that we're building these in a way. So if we build out the multi-node support, we want to make sure that we're building it in a way that, could address some of the SIG testing needs if possible. It doesn't really, I guess one other thing to address is that I think a lot of people are scared of more meetings. These meetings are already going on, so it's not, they're just informal in the sense that they're not an official working group meeting. Is that right or wrong? I mean, it's just kind of it was born out of necessity.
Sure.
So.
I think the concern I'm trying to raise is the flat hierarchy we have of some 30-something different groups is really not good for human discoverability. So I'm trying to think of it in terms of a hierarchy that makes it easier to kind of understand where I should go if I'm interested in this particular topic, as opposed to searching in amongst 31 instead of 30 groups or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of what we're also trying to address right now because, we have all these efforts going on that are kind of spanning multiple tools. and there's really just no way for people to discover it. It's people aren't really that knowledgeable about the bootstrapper interface or the libmachine interface in MiniCube, and that's, I think, something that we would love to get more people involved in efforts like that, because a lot of people seem to be concerned about them, but I don't think they know the right place to go to talk about it.
You're absolutely right, though. There is at some point there is a flat list of meetings that are overlaid onto everyone's weekly schedule. So whether it's organized as there's no notion of sub-SIGs, and even working groups they're supposed to be sponsored by a SIG, but they're not actually ever nested.
I would say sub-projects are kind of what I'm thinking of when I think of when you say sub-SIG. That's what I think of. A group of people who are interested in delivering on some piece of code that accomplishes some discrete objective.
Right.
But so I kind of want to hear from Eric or Steve or other folks longer live with the SIG. Do you see other areas of overlap here? My impression is more of the overlap of this SIG is with contributor experience. I don't see much of what's being proposed by this working group as overlapping with our SIG, other than our extreme interest in a local testing solution. Seeing head nodding.
So yeah, I would definitely say that the local testing, right, is definitely something that Quentin's been working on, and I feel like it'd be useful if Quentin and the other people working on the nested Docker solutions are talking to the people working on the MiniCube efforts. I think that would be useful to make sure that we're developing and going in a good way there. Depending on how developer tools work out, Scaffold kind of Prow sort of has ideas of a build workflow, right? And so I could potentially see overlap there. And Cube, I don't know exactly, about the whole bootstrapping interface. That potentially is similar to Cube Test or whatever. So I don't feel strongly about what the hierarchy is, but I do feel like it would be useful to make sure that the things coming out of the developer tools working group are that we are informed of and are able to either influence or take advantage of.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess my only comment would be on the overlap on the build flow side of things. I guess we have a pretty sophisticated set of ideas about that in OpenShift. Which I think we're expecting to at least voice some of those opinions or lessons learned in the working group. And so I guess I'm not sure it's a SIG testing involvement as much as just I wouldn't expect that to be a super huge involvement from the SIG.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I guess my only other thing is, I sort of feel like in an ideal world, right, just as Tim was talking about how, I feel like there should be, that is a Venn diagram, and I feel like there should be, if we get really good developer tools that apply to people making Kubernetes applications, since a lot of the things about Kubernetes are, Kubernetes deployments themselves, theoretically that should hopefully be something useful for us to use and give to developers to make the experience of contributing to Kubernetes better as well.
Cool. So I think we look forward to hearing sort of what you learn in shopping us around with other SIGs. Like I said, I feel like there's a lot of interest in collaborating for sure, and some of these efforts are great, and we'd love to help push that forward. It's just, oh my God, so many meetings. So whatever we can do to help you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in the way that makes the most sense, looking forward to moving forward on that. Does that work for you, Matt?
Yeah. I guess if you want to comment on that thread, just what we talked about, or I could post a summary just to loop in the non-SIG testing people. That's kind of what I've been doing just as we go around these different SIGs, just to to kind of let Kubernetes devs know exactly what we talked about.
Sure, I'm totally happy to post a comment there, and anybody else who's attending here who's got opinions, post.
Feel free to. There's a separate channel, and I'll probably send an invite. Is there a separate MiniCube meeting or some sub-project meeting or anything like that? Because I'm only interested in the MiniCube parts, and I'm not interested in the other ones.
That's fair. So we've been having this this local dev meeting. It's mainly been with the MiniShift folks, but we've been trying to, as part of this proposal, move that into the developer tools working group. But we're still having those meetings now, so I could loop you in on those. It's not published anywhere, which is part of the problem of discoverability.
Why don't I send you a document that we've been working on for a proposal around the work that I've mentioned earlier that kind of overlaps with some aspects of MiniCube. And we talked about MiniCube too, because the requirements might, hit each other, so.
Yeah, that thing, for what it's worth, sounds definitely like a sub-project to me. And it would be a matter of figuring out which SIG should, like, quote unquote, own that sub-project, but it's a sub-project that owns its own destiny, right? Okay, so we're kind of at the 30-minute mark, which is traditionally when we've ended these, but we still have two kind of substantive things on the agenda if folks want to keep on going. One of them was a discussion that Christoph Blecker and Eric Feda have about, like, what does LGTM mean, what does approve mean, and what does the GitHub approve button mean? Are we going to have enough people around to have that discussion substantively, or should we have that in, like, a breakout, or what would you guys like to do?
I think, the specific mechanics of how all these things work might be good for a breakout. I think the important, the thing that I wanted to talk about was, just to have us keep in mind that, like, there are various consumers of Prow, and so, there's sort of one. Obviously, the largest by far user of Prow is the Kubernetes community, but, like, we use it internally at Google for some stuff. I think Red Hat uses it for some stuff as well, and so we should sort of try and decouple the what is best for the Kubernetes community to how they want to use Prow, and what is sort of how do we want Prow to be used for other people. And so I don't know, Christoph, if you had, are you interested in, what are your thoughts? I'm interested in your thoughts mostly.
First, hi everybody. I haven't really attended this meeting much, but hi, I'm here. You've probably seen me around Slack and GitHub and that kind of stuff. I also want to just introduce myself as, hi, I'm your new technical lead over at the Contributor Experience. So you might be seeing more of me here as I kind of come as an ambassador. So on this particular topic, I completely agree with what you're saying, Eric, that we should kind of distinctly separate what is the best for Prow, like what defaults we want to set as the best for Prow as a tool in itself, and what settings we choose for the Kubernetes community as we enable Prow on Kubernetes repos. I care definitely more about how we enable and use it for the Kubernetes repos itself. I have opinions on the other, but I definitely care more about how we use it. But yeah, I think that might be a good, this topic might be a good thing for a breakout.
Okay. Maybe I'll try and find some invites, schedule that. We've had success with those in the past, so maybe later this week I'll try and find some. Let me know on Slack if you are interested, anybody interested, and I'll also toss out the meeting invite to the mailing list generally, but we'll try and optimize people who say they want to attend, finding time that works for all of those people.
Okay, cool. That sounds great. Matt Landis, you had something about end-to-end tests failing if the cluster domain is something other than, oh boy, hard codes are fun.
Yeah, I just, in running the end-to-end tests, at one point we had a cluster domain that was not cluster.local, and the end-to-end tests failed. There's some I think I linked to it in the GitHub issue. There's a couple. It's running through all of the different, can you reach, Kubernetes.default and those, and at some point it is looking under service.cluster.local, which doesn't exist if you're if you've overridden the cluster domain.
Okay. And
so
it's a
really, I'm just it is a conformance test. So I mean, it's a networking test. So should I go bug SIG networking about this? Do we have a good way to insert this data? Because it's my understanding this isn't really discoverable. This is why we pass it into the kubelets.
I am not sure off the top of my head, so I would, SIG networking might be a good place to ask.
Okay.
SIG architecture is generally what I'm going to suggest as the arbiter of what is appropriate behavior for a test that calls itself conformance.
Okay.
So it seems like this test is ensuring that there's something there that provides the correct DNS responding to the correct names, and I think this is something you'd want to really get right as the project is looking to switch from kubeDNS to core DNS is one of its ways.
Okay. All right, so SIG architecture and SIG networking, go talk to those guys.
Yep.
All right, awesome.
But I think in general, we're fully supportive of not hard coding things. So that shouldn't hopefully be too challenging of a discussion.
That is good to hear.
Yeah, totally. Okay, excellent. Apologies for running long. Looking forward to that breakout discussion. And I think that's it for our Tuesday. Thank you for your time, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Happy, glad you made it safely home.
It was a grueling drive.